What is an amazing movie that has a god-awful sequel? Highlander. Got my buddies to go see it in the theater. We all agreed to walk out halfway through. Embarrassing trying to explain to them how good the first one was. They were like, yeah right. Lunch is on you bitch. Edit. A few comments made about my pals not seeing the original. I was the only fantasy nerd in out clique. It was not a movie they would ever go see freely, which made it all the worse as it probably put them off the genre for life. The sequel is really not good. I really tried, but Surf's Up is one of my favorite animated movies, and WWE ruined it as a viable franchise. My favorite part of Surf's Up is the film style. They created a full 3D environment with tons of stuff happening all at once and sometimes even off-screen like you would find on a real movie set. It's a very unique film style and it has stayed as a favorite for years. I hate the trend of adding WWE wrestlers to properties that don't really need them. Not saying WWE actors shouldn't act. How we got a good Peacemaker even though we couldn't see him, but things like Scooby-Doo and WWE or Surf's Up 2 seemed like movie aisle filler. The Pacific Rim sequel made me so sad. They did some amazing world building in the first one and supplementary comic books describing the background lore. Then they took what made the first one so great and just. Also, WHY Kid of Mako? She was so badass and had personality, character development and so much potential, and only to replace her with oh yeah, this is the new love interest. Stock character with its zero explanation, zero reason. The Highlander TV series is pretty good for what it was, which is the attempt to recapture the magic from the movie for the small screen, and it was watchable. They originally offered Christopher Lambert the role, but he turned them down. Oh well. Instead we went on to have 5 more movies and 2 more TV series based on that thing. Highlander 2, The Quickening, 1991, movie. Highlander, the series, 1992 to 1998, TV. Highlander, the animated series, 1994 to 1996, TV. Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, 1995, movie. Highlander, The Raven, 1998, TV. Highlander, Endgame, 2000, movie. Highlander, The Search for Vengeance, 2007, movie. Highlander, The Source, 2007, movie. I am watching the animated series right now and my major complaint is that I can't hear it. I think the audio is messed up because it was a French-Canadian, American CO production, so the idea was to animate once and record sound twice, so they've got some really good Foley, but it's cranked way up, to the point where you can't hear some of the characters. So I can't really give an honest review of the material. Since it was available on Amazon I also watched Highlander, The Source, and let me tell you, don't. This movie doesn't know what it wants to be and it doesn't know how to tell you about it. Joe, the Watcher from the series, plays a major role in the movie despite it being against the Watcher code. And there's a zone of vulnerability on planet Earth that none of the other immortals ever knew about, and the guy who has super speed, well he's put into the movie with cartoonish movement, so it's barely watchable. I recently watched the second one for the first time. I had no idea there was a sequel. About 10 minutes and I was like WTF is this trash? 30 minutes and I was wondering who in their right mind would allow their name to be printed in the credits of such an awful movie. I watched to the end hoping it'd eventually get better. Wow, was I wrong. During the movie I texted my GF to tell her how I was watching one of the worst movies I'd ever seen. After it was over, I googled it to read reviews to confirm my bias, and to my complete lack of surprise, it was on some lists for worst movie ever made. It was fun reading some of the reviews with the terrible acting and plot still fresh in my brain. We had Michael Ironside doing his best to be entertaining like the Kurgan. Problem was his laughs were forced and awkward. The Kurgan was legitimately evil and his laugh fit the character. Then the stupid bird people, randomly giggling in a forced manner. Why exactly? God, that movie sucked. A few of the Sean Connery scenes were entertaining, even if they brought him back from the dead in a ridiculous plot device. I watched Darko, agreed, it was trash. and I remember one thing in particular that stood out to me. Okay, so in the first film, a jet engine warps back in time, falls from the sky, and kills Donnie. In Starco, they talk about random shit like a dumpster and a manhole cover falling from the sky and killing people. Like okay, the jet engine I get because it started up in the sky, and after time traveling it was still in its same location but with no plane to hold it up, so it fell. So then why did the dumpster and manhole cover end up falling from the sky? Shouldn't they just time travel to the same spot they were originally, on the ground? I know I'm nitpicking an already shitty movie, but like they didn't even try to understand the physics that were set up in the first movie. It wasn't just random object fell from a random place, there was actually sense to it, albeit in a very sci-fi way. The two good things to come out of Love Never Dies was the Coney Island Waltz, Until I Hear You Sing. Those two are legit great pieces of music, but the whole thing is a mess. Aside from the original Phantom of the Opera taking place on 1881, and this being set 10 years later in 1904, and Chance Cryer's not even acting even remotely like they're the same people, the whole story is basically Andrew Lloyd Webber telling Sarah Brightman how much of a mistake she made breaking up with him and making the audience suffer for it. The Mask of Sorrow, with Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Anthony Hopkins, is one of my favorite movies of all time. Literally top 5 for me. The follow-up, The Legend of Sorrow, is one of my top 5 disappointments. I don't know why. I guess it's just like a paint-by-numbers rehash. All the excitement, the freshness, the adventure, the heart, it's all gone in the second one. It's like the actors and writers came back and said, alright, I guess we gotta do this again then. I don't think the sequel is horrible, it's just that the magic that really fueled the original, the burning passion between the romantic leads, and the burning desire for revenge, from both the old Zorro and the new, is not really there. So the entire movie looks kind of the same as the original, but the emotion driving the original is missing, and so it all feels superficial and hollow. The third is passable as a TV movie, I guess, but the other two, especially Wicked Prayer, make me very sad indeed. Though the short-lived TV series was actually alright. Plus I have a slight man crush on Mark Dacascos. Interesting fact, Iggy Pop was originally meant to have played Fun Boy in the first film, which means that Iggy Pop could have ended up having a hand in Brandon Lee's accidental death. Not so fun fact, they were making a much better movie until disgraced rapist Harvey Weinstein got involved. The original concept has much more depth, pathos, and ends on a severe melancholy note. Weinstein saw the work print and forced it to be edited so it was like the first one. There's an excellent deep dive on the YouTube channel Good Bad Flicks. Added link. Also, I kind of enjoyed the third one. The fourth could have been good if everyone hadn't just phoned it in. This was a direct-to-video one. No, Disney had a habit of basically recycling all their IPs around the early aughts and making cheap and weak direct-to-video sequels. There was a whole bunch of them: Lion King, Aladdin, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, a bunch of others. Disney's animation studios were having some real trouble trying to put together something decent around this period. The one that I would say was half decent was Lion King 1 1/2, which I always referred to as Timon and Pumbaa Are Dead because it basically gives those two characters the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern treatment, sans the existentialism. Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into her side. Chief, we was coming back from the island of Tainan too late. We just delivered the bomb. The Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about a half hour. Tiger. 13-footer. You know how you know that in the water, Chief? You can tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was that our bomb mission was so secret. No distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us overdue for a week. Very first light, Chief, sharks come cruising by. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. It was sorta like you see in the calendars. You know, the infantry squares in the old calendars, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was the shark come to the nearest man. That man he starts pounding and hollering, and sometimes that shark he go away. But sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark looks right at ya, right into your eyes. And the thing about a shark is he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at ya, he doesn't even seem to be living, till he bites ya, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and despite all your pounding and your hollering, those sharks come in and they rip you to pieces. You know, by the end of that first dawn, lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks there were, maybe 1,000. I do know how many men. They averaged 6 an hour. Thursday morning, Chief, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson from Cleveland, baseball player, bosun's mate. I thought he was asleep. I reached over to wake him up. He bobbed up, down in the water. He was like a kinda top, upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist. At noon on the 5th day, a Lockheed Ventura swung in low and he spotted us. A young pilot, lot younger than Mr. Hooper here. Anyway, he spotted us, and a few hours later a big ol' fat PBY come down and started to pick us up. You know, that was the time I was most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So, 1,100 men went into the water. 316 men come out. The sharks took the rest. June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. See, they could have done that movie in space instead and at least found a cult following. Like, oh no, an asteroid disabled our engines and now we're being pulled into that black hole and we only have enough escape pods for the woman and children and the dude on deck with the gun until we kicked his ass and took his gun, and now the space band plays their space themes all sad and noble, like, while most of us die and the rest of us drift hopelessly in a stable orbit with our distress beacons on, staying the same age while we wait for someone several hundred years in the future to come rescue us after stumbling upon the beacon by chance due to all the weirdly obscure scientific interference crap the black hole was emitting because science or something like that. The worst thing for me is how they messed up the sense of scale. The action in the first worked so well because it all felt heavy and meaty and rooted in reality. The camera angles from the ground gave a real sense of scale, and the slow but powerful movements of the jiggers with the thrusters on the arms and shit made it all feel right. The sequel was like Transformers with everything moving too fast and easily. The problem is that 2 Jake simply doesn't have the cinematography nor dialogue of the first movie. As a hard-boiled gumshoe in the 1950s dealing with lingering regret, it actually works as a movie. It's almost better as a standalone film where you've never seen the original. But you're making a sequel to fucking Chinatown, the only movie that can give The Godfather 2 a run for its money as best movie to come out of the 1970s. You need to be 10/10ths on every category: cinematography, screenplay, acting, performances, soundtrack, dialogue, even the costume and aesthetic. The SpongeBob movie, SM1. SpongeBob and Patrick set out on a road trip adventure, not realizing that the fate of Bikini Bottom lies in their hands as Plankton's most ingenious plan unfolds. SM2. Not Painty the pirate steals the secret formula and SpongeBob can't make the patty from memory for some dumb reason, so they journey to the surface. For like 10 minutes after SpongeBob and Plankton go on a meaningless acid trip to fill up the feature time. SM3, okay fans, will give you a road trip adventure, but not without shoehorning this stupid spin-off preview that doesn't make sense. There's been a few that really stood out to me. I first watched Marley, pretty good. Then I saw Marley and Me, and it didn't make any sense. Is Bob Marley supposed to be reincarnated into the dog? Then you've got 28 Days, the movie with Sandra Bullock. I then watched the sequel, 28 Days Later, and man, things really got out of hand quick in the world in just another month. I think they could have done a better job explaining just how Sandra Bullock's character going into rehab led to a zombie apocalypse. No shit, a friend of mine, who is in general oblivious to pop culture, celebrities, once told me while she enjoyed the film Blade Runner she didn't understand why the lead changed and the plot was confusing. This was after 2049 had come out, so I figured she was comparing 2049 to the original. Yeah, but it's kinda racist. In what way? Interesting take, I thought. Hughes the original one had a black actor and he was a vampire? Yep, she legit thought Blade Runner was a sequel to Blade. She also texted me to explain the plot of B-movie to her, which I found out after 5 minutes of texting was actually the happening. When I asked her why she thought that was the B-movie, her reasoning was, she knows there is a movie called The B-movie. The happening had B's in the plotline, minor. In Shock Treatment's defense, there was supposed to be a trilogy plan instead. Rocky Horror Shows His Heels was to feature Brad and Janet after the events of the first one, with Rocky now with Janet, who's pregnant with Frank's baby, and Brad becomes a go-go dancer with his newfound sexual awakening and dies of an STD. Then the third movie, Revenge of the Old Queen, was Riff Raff and Magenta returned home to Transylvania to report back to the Old Queen. She's actually Frank's mother, and charges those two with finding Frank's killer. The scripts are out there somewhere and there was even a rare promo song leaked from the third one that's a banger, The Moon-Drenched Shores of Transylvania, for those curious. But then production hell kicked in. Susan Sarandon wanted more money to return, which was too rich for them at the time, and the half measure that came out of things ended up being Shock Treatment. Fun fact, Cliff the Young, Brad/Farley cast in Street, was supposed to be Brad in the first one, but was double booked with another movie, so we got the original Brad. We did. It's not the greatest sequel, it has obvious ploys to capitalize on what hit in the first movie, Little Black Dress being a time warp stand-in for instance, but for what it became I still find things to enjoy from O'Brien's script. Little bits of dialogue still ends up mattering through the movie and a few songs are catchy, Bitchin' in the Kitchen, me. Interesting. I think most people find the sequel even more compelling, but I can see how someone might appreciate the nuance and moral ambiguity of the original. By comparison, the sequel had a cardboard villain who was just plain evil. It was good guys versus bad guys, black and white with no shades of gray, except one of the good guys turned out to be Joe Stalin. I thought that was a fascinating twist, so I end up giving them both 5 stars. WW1 is fascinating. You start out on horseback making daring charges at the enemy only to be mowed down by the newfangled machine gun. When charges didn't work you dug a trench and waiting for the other side to charge. Each side to figure out how to wage a new kind of war in a modern era. Neither side could advance, so they tried to find a way to kill as many as you can to hope to advance a few feet. WW2 had things a bit more figured out and similar armaments. Until the atomic bomb came around, it was more of a strategic war based on plans and forethought, still fascinating in its own way, but most shows about it related to battle tactics or specific battles. WW1 has more about the human psyche and evolution of combat demo. Despicable Me. Look, I know everyone is scarred by the Minions at this point, but the first movie had genuine heart and emotion to it and was a solid look at a villain unexpectedly becoming a father and figuring out how to be a single dad. And the Minions back then were an amusing comedic relief that while goofy weren't too over the top. And then the second movie just fell into a really disappointing trope of little girls need a mother. Fuck all the single dads who don't have or want that option, and gay fathers right, also Gru is reformed now, which takes away so much of the nuance of it. And then from there the following movies all devolved into Minion shenanigans and lost all semblance of charm it originally had. T3 isn't great but it's watchable. I saw Salvation about 6 months ago and thought it did a good job at portraying what it needed to. Definitely not comparable to T2, but underrated nonetheless. Edit. What I mean is that Salvation was made to portray the war against the machines. While it has its flaws, it is entertaining with its action and gritty scenery. That's the one I came here for. The first one had an interesting cast and premise and felt like it really had some magic. The second one felt like some over-dramatized dumpster fire that had none of the magic. I pirated it and still felt tripped off.